Okay, we're going to make sourdough bread this week. These are my 2 jars of starter. I have 2 jars of sourdough starter because I have once in my life committed yeast murder where I killed a jar of sourdough starter. And this way, if I kill one, at least I have 2. So I highly recommend keeping 2. So these are the same, and I keep them genetically similar by using the same spoon when I mix them, and they smell like really sour sourdough bread and acetone. And right now, they haven't been fed. They've been in the fridge for about 5 days, just giving a little bit of slow fermentation. So they're pretty strong smelling. So in order to feed these the night before I'm going to make sourdough, I like to add a little bit of white and whole wheat flour. Some people just use white, some people just use whole wheat. I like both. So I've got some white and whole wheat flour here. And I don't measure. I'm really bad at measuring. I just kind of look at it and I think, okay, I'm going to make 2 loaves of bread. So I want to add about a big spoonful, and I always make a mess, of white and a little bit smaller of a spoonful of wheat to each one. And I like to mix these with a wooden spoon. Something about the metal mixing with the yeast, I've understood that it causes some of them to die. I don't really know if it's true, but I've been told wooden spoon, so I'm going to grab a wooden spoon. Somewhere. All right, so we live in Tucson in the desert, and our water is very hard, so we have an RO system, so I'm going to add some RO water to this. And the amount of water that you want to add is just enough to make it like a wet ball of sourdough. So I add a little bit on the left side, and I'll go ahead and stir this up. And you can you see this? Inside. As I stir, and I use the handle side and I hold on to this. It's easier for my hand to hold on to the whole spoon rather than the handle. You might find that's easier too. And the consistency, can you see that? That I've got, it's about like that. So that should be good, and I like to scrape down the sides a little bit. So there's one, and like I said, I like to keep them, I like to stir them really well, make sure all those yeast, bacteria, fungus, whatever kind of fun things are growing in this that make sourdough heaven, get mixed in well with the new flour that we're feeding it with. And I have a little bit of sourdough starter from this jar. I'm going to mix them with the other next because it's on the spoon. So these starters, now that I've mixed them, it's very complicated, I'm going to leave out all night. And what'll happen is these starters will start to bubble and foam, and the yeast, bacteria, and fungus inside of these will, and all those are good for you, by the way, if you're thinking, ew, bacteria, fungus, mushrooms, yeast, bacteria, good. They will multiply, and they will rise inside of this and get bigger, and tomorrow morning I will have a big bubbly mess of starter. And I like to close these just a little bit loose, like that's finger tight, and then I loosen up just a little bit, get a little bit of oxygen. Those will stay here all night, and I'm going to clean up my giant floury mess. See you tomorrow morning. Good morning. All right, it's the next morning, and our starter has been going all night. So now we're going to go ahead and put together our bread dough. So I've got here a bowl, and I've got a stand mixer. Stand mixers make it very easy to make sourdough. And a scale makes it easy if you are measuring challenged, kind of like I am. As we make this bread, I'm going to be using bread flour and whole wheat flour, a mixture of the two. It gives it good flavor and also more fiber. The bread flour is important because it is full of gluten. Bread flour has a higher gluten content than all-purpose flour, therefore it will make your bread a much better texture. It's going to be delicious. So we're going to zero out our scale with our bowl on it, and I'm going to add 300 grams of bread flour. I always get a little bit too much. All right, 300 grams of bread flour. I'm going to set this to the side. And I'm going to grab my whole wheat flour and add 100 grams of this. All right, that gives us exactly 400 grams, 300 of white bread flour, and 100 of whole wheat flour. Next, I'm going to add my flax seeds. So these are golden flax seeds, and flax seeds are really good for you. They're full of a fatty acid called ALA, and it's kind of the same health benefits you guys have heard, omega fatty acids in fish. So flax seeds, these are whole and they are golden. You can buy the brown ones or the golden ones. They're both good, but always store them in the refrigerator in whole form. If you buy the ground ones, what happens is that acid, that fatty acid that's so good for you, is more bioavailable, but it goes rancid really fast. So ground flax seeds, very good for you. Whole flax seeds, also very good for you. Best kept in the fridge. All right, do not add ground flaxseed to this recipe. It is a natural thickener, and it will make your bread into a gummy ball of not bread. So whole flax seeds, I'm going to add 50 grams. You can add a little bit less than that if you are afraid of adding more grains to your bread, but it's really good for you, and it gives the bread this like amazing, almost meaty flavor. They're pretty delicious. All right, so I have got all of my dry ingredients, and now I'm going to add my wet. This is 1.5 cups of warm water. How warm do you want the water? You want to be able to stick your finger in the water, and it should feel warmer than you, but not so hot that you have to pull your finger out right away. That is too hot. So this is quite comfortable, like a warm, lukewarm bath. We're going to add this into the mix, and then we're going to use our stand mixer. Make sure you lock your bowl in so it doesn't go flying across the room. This is a dough hook. Stand mixers come, generally when you buy them, with a flat paddle, a whisk, and one of these. This is for making bread. We're going to attach that on and get this going. Always start it on low, because if you start it too high, the flour is going to just poof out of the bowl and go everywhere, and it's a pain in the butt to clean up. So start on low, and once the ingredients start to come together, looking not just like water and not just like flour, you can kick it up to 2. On this speed, you're going to let it go for a few moments, probably about 2 or 3. What you're looking for is the dough is going to first start looking out too wet, and then it's going to form a shaggy ball, and it's going to look too dry. And you're tempted, oh my gosh, I didn't put enough water in, I'm going to add more water. Don't do that. Give it another minute, and it will come together and form a wet ball of dough. And once that happens, all that's in there is flour and water and flax seeds. And the process that's going to happen next is called autolysing. That is where the water molecules work their way into the flour and help create a textured bread that's even better. It hydrates the flour. If you skip this step, it's not that big of a deal, but it is important. The yeast we're going to add in our next step, the starter and the yeast and the salt we're going to add in our next step, and that's going to when it is going to start to become actual bread. All right, so my stand mixer has been going for just a little bit now, and I have got the mix that I want. So I'm going to wet my hands, pop this up, and your dough is going to be stuck to your hook, and with wet hands so that you can actually slide it off without the flour and water and flaxseed sticking to you, it's going to come like this. So this ball is going to sit and do its autolyse work for the next 20 minutes. I'm going to cover it up loosely. I have these lids that came with my stand mixer, but you can use a plate, anything that you have. And we'll be back in 20 minutes to show you what the next step is. See you soon. All right, it has been 20 minutes, and we are going to now add our starter to our ball of autolysed flour, water, and flax seeds. Nothing's changed. It looks just the same as when you left it. We're going to put it on our scale, zero that out, and add our starter. Our starter's been going all night long, and yeasty sourdough acetone. I don't know if you can see that, but it's nice and bubbly. It's got lots of little bubbles on the top, and it has increased in volume. We're going to add 100 grams to our mix here. All right, style points for the not making a mess on that one. And then we are also going to add our salt at this point. So I'm using a fine grain salt, and if you're using a larger grain salt, you use more. If you're using finer grain salt, you use less. When you have a finer grain salt, more salt grains fit in a measuring device than a large grain. So I'm going to grab my measuring spoons for this. I don't measure a lot of things, but I do measure the salt because that can get away from you. So I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of salt to this, and then we're going to mix it back up again. So no major visual changes are going to happen during this mixing process. You're just looking for everything to be incorporated and to let it go for at least 2, if not 3 minutes. This is like kneading your dough, okay? You want to make sure all of that yeast is really well incorporated and salt is really well incorporated throughout the dough. So we're going to let this go, and then we're going to wait another 20 minutes after the 2 to 3 minutes of mixing before our next step. I'll see you then. All right, it has been about 20 minutes. In that time, I have done some damage control on cleanup. It's a good time for that. And I'm also going to feed my starter again. So we've used starter, we've depleted it, we've let it rise, and now it's hungry. It needs some more flour. So we're going to give it a bit more flour, just like we did the night before. Perhaps a little bit less, because you're going to stick this back in the fridge until you're ready for it again. But you want to put it back in the fridge well fed, not hungry. All right, so we've got our flour mixture, the whole wheat and the white. We've got a little bit of water, and we're going to mix it up. All right, give it a good mix. Give your sides a bit of a scrape down. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to put the lid back on this tightly this time, and I'm going to pop this back in the fridge eventually. There we go. To be used in about 5 days, maybe 7 days, when I'm going to make sourdough bread again. Now, if you go a couple of weeks between making bread, you do need to do this process and add a little bit more flour and water to your starter to keep it well fed. This is a living organism, and you need to feed it just like it's like a pet, like a puppy or a kitty. All right, I'm going to put this in the fridge, and then we're going to do our first stretch and fold. Okay, our bread has been sitting for about 20 minutes, and it hasn't changed. It hasn't risen at this point. It's just starting. So our stretch and fold is going to be where we reach down, grab a fold of the flour, and flop it over on itself. And then you turn the bowl 90 degrees, and you do it again. And you do it at least 4 times, turning the bowl 90 degrees each time. Do this with wet hands so it doesn't stick to you as much. Okay, so I'm reaching in. I'm grabbing some of the bread. It's kind of sticky, kind of wet. That's okay. This is a wet recipe. Reach in, pull, stretch, fold. Reach in, pull, stretch, fold. And you can do this several times. And what you'll notice is the more you do this, the bread starts to form and get a little bit tougher. And that's what you're looking for, because as you're doing this, you're developing the gluten. Gluten sounds like glue because it glues the bread together. What gives it its texture and structure. So the first time you do this, it's going to stay pretty sticky and wet, and you're going to do this a total of 3 times. And each time it's going to get more and more a stiff texture, like a ball of good bread dough that you could imagine like rolling out without it sticking to everything. So we're going to wait another 20 minutes and do this again, and then another 20 minutes and do it one more time for a total of 3 stretch and folds. And I will come back and show you up close what that looks like towards the end and hold it up and show you the texture that changes. Right now, you can see it's nice and sticky and loose still. So we're going to let that sit for another 20 minutes, and I'll show you what it looks like at the last fold so you can see what the texture difference is. Okay, we are at stretch and fold number 3. This is going to be the last time that we stretch and fold our dough before we let it rest for the whole rest of the day and rise. So we're going to start with the same motion, going into the bowl, grabbing a handful, pulling it up, and folding it. And you're going to do this maybe 2 or 3 times, and then the dough will release from the bowl. And what you've got here now, you can really start to see the texture of this has changed, and it's become more elastic, and the gluten has developed and created that glue in the gluten. This is going to give our dough and our bread, when it's finished, so much amazing flavor. So as you can see, I'm just pulling this, giving a little shake to make sure it stretches really well, and folding it over. So stretch, and it's getting stronger, like this is a workout. And then fold. And after you've done that, you've got this nice ball of dough back in the bowl. Cover it back up, and we're going to let this rest and rise for the whole rest of the day. This is a long ferment process. This is a good time to walk away and just let it do its thing. Leave it in a warm spot, not on the stove, but also not at like 40 degrees. So we're going to walk away, and at night, right before we go to bed, we will take this dough after it's risen, shape it into a ball, and get it ready to go in the fridge overnight. I'll be back with you in just a little bit to do that. Welcome back. It is now evening after a day of all kinds of fun working, playing, gardening. It's time to get our bread ready to go in the refrigerator overnight before we bake it in the morning. So our bread has been rising all day long while we were out playing, and you can see it's doubled in size. Remember that tiny ball we plopped in there? It's quite a lot bigger now. So we are going to take this bread and make it into the shape of our actual sourdough loaf. We're going to dust the surface of our counter with or a board, if you've got like a tile counter, with a little bit of flour. Not too much, you just want it to be very light. And you're going to, with your floured fingertips, scoop your bread out of the bowl from the sides, just kind of encouraging it and letting it plop down in this little pile of lightly dusted flour. All right, you can see we've got most of that out of there. We'll set that down. Now we've got our bread dough here, and it's flattening out and deflating, and that's what we want it to do. And we're going to stretch it into the size of a rectangle. All right. So with this rectangle, we're going to take it and fold it over once and then twice on itself, like you're folding a letter. You're then going to turn it and fold it over on itself again, making it into a nice little roll. It's like a cinnamon roll. This is going to create all of those amazing bubbles and holes inside of your bread and pockets. You know, when you butter your bread and you get that, like, or jam or peanut butter, you get that extra big ball of deliciousness. That makes this hole available for that. So now that we've had this folded up, we're going to make it into an actual loaf shape. So you're going to push it down against the surface and pull it towards you and roll it under. And push it down, pull it towards you and roll it under. And you keep doing this to create surface tension along the crust or outer surface of your bread. And you'll see I'm pushing it down and then rolling it over and under in one direction. Everyone's got their own style of doing this. If you end up with a ball and it's got surface tension, you did it right. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect to make bread or do most things good in life. All right, we've got a nice shaped ball now. We're going to put a little bit of extra flour inside of our basket. So I have this basket, but if you do not, if you just have a bowl, then you can use that. You can take this bowl and take a non-fuzzy towel and actually push it down inside of the bowl. And now you have essentially the same thing. So you don't have to buy one of these yet. So dust this if you're going to use this, just the same, perhaps a little bit more. And then you're going to pick up your ball of dough and you're going to plop it down in your basket. And there you go. You're going to put this in the refrigerator overnight to have another fermentation and yeast eating gluten cycle. If you put it in the fridge like this, it will dry out, so you do need to cover it with a plastic bag. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And you want to wrap it up just a bit tight. You don't want any air to get in there. So there we go. Wrapped up ball of sourdough waiting to be baked in the morning. We're going to bake this in a Dutch oven in the oven. And if you look over here, I have got a Dutch oven. This is a cast iron Dutch oven. It's quite heavy. It's still new, so it's still nice and pretty inside. They get black after a while. So if you remember to put this in the oven the night before, the chances of you actually having it in the oven to preheat like it needs to be are higher. So we're going to stick that in the oven now, get this in the refrigerator, and then go to bed. I've got this on a middle rack. If you leave this too low in your oven, you will burn the underside of your bread, and it will just be an area of the bread you don't want to eat, but middle rack, always where you want it to be. All right, I'm going to put this in the oven, in the refrigerator, not the oven. That would be a big mess, and I will see you guys in the morning. Okay, it is the next morning, and we are going to bake our bread today. So it's been overnight in the refrigerator, covered up in a bag, and let's see how it did. All right. So as you can see, overnight it rose just a little bit. Up to this point, I have had my oven preheating at 480 degrees. You want to preheat your oven well with the Dutch ovens in it for 480 degrees. It takes a little while to heat out depending on your oven, so give it time. So now that we have our bread uncovered and it's risen nicely overnight, gone through its fermentation cycle, we are going to use a piece of parchment paper. Parchment, not wax paper. If you use wax paper, it'll stick to the bottom of your bread. If you use parchment, everything releases and it gives you handles to move the dough around really easily. So what we're going to do now is cover our bowl and invert, or your bowl with a towel in it. Invert this and plop it down. The purpose for the towel is that it releases easily. If you use one of these bread baskets without a towel, sometimes it sticks, and that's not a fun morning. All right, so now we're going to score the top to give the bread an area to rise up through and not get caught in the crust. I use a razor blade, and I just keep an extra razor blade in a pill bottle so that I accidentally cut myself. And there are fancy bread knives that you can cut with, but I like these. I like them to be razor sharp, and this, as it is a razor, is razor sharp. So you're going to cut a big cross across the top, and you want to go in a couple of inches, at least an inch. You're actually going in and giving a pretty deep cut. You guys can see that. And we're going to make a cross across the top. So turning 90 degrees, coming this way. And I like to spin it at this point rather than pull it across. Otherwise it tears it and deforms it a little bit too much. All right. So we've got a cross there. It's not perfect, which is good. It should not be perfect. We'll set that down, and now we're going to put this in the oven. So before we do that, we're going to pull out one of our Dutch ovens. Be careful, they are heavy and screaming hot right now. Okay, so we've got our Dutch oven out. I'm going to take the lid off and use my parchment paper as a handle to pick up my dough and plop it down in my oven. I'm going to cover this up. This bread has a high moisture content. Remember how sticky the dough was? Covering it up in a Dutch oven like this allows that moisture to create an amazing crust on the bread and allows the bread to rise beautifully. So we'll pop this back in the oven now. Okay, our bread has been preheating at 480 degrees. Our oven has been preheating at 480 degrees. At this point, we're going to lower the temperature to 470. And we're going to bake this for 28 minutes. After that 28 minutes, you are going to lower the temperature to 430 degrees. Take the lid off. This is going to allow that last browning process to happen on your bread and cook that for an additional 8 minutes uncovered. So we'll see you back at that point, and I'll show you what it looks like when it comes out of the oven. All right, it's ready. Let's see how we did. Okay, those handles of your parchment paper you can use to take this out of the pan immediately and to set it down. Oh, that looks so good. All right, you can see our bread is baked. It is risen. You can see where we scored it. And another one of the ways that you can test for doneness is actually to thump the bottom. It should sound hollow like it does. This smells like heaven. I wish you had smell-o-vision. Now, the hard part is to resist the urge to break into it right away. It's still in its baking process. So you need to give this about another 1, preferably 2 hours to completely cool. If you cut into it too soon while it's still really warm, the whole texture of the bread is ruined. It becomes like a gummy, nasty mess inside. So resist the urge and go do something else. And I will show you cutting into this bread once it's fully cooled next. Hello, I am Julia Child. Welcome to the French Chef. Today we are going to be drinking wine and making bread because those are the best things in life.